Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and I'll be with you for the next little while as we move into a new chapter in the Gospel of Mark in our ongoing translation notes series. The next section, as I'm looking at it, is Mark 14, 1 through 9. We're going to do part 1 today. Probably take that in 3 parts because today I've got a shorter than usual handout, you'll notice. Just 2.5 pages. We'll do the first 2 verses of chapter 14, but I also had promised that we would, before we finished with Mark 13, that we would look at the gospel parallel tool, the synopsis, to compare and contrast a little bit. So we'll spend some of our time today doing that. And that, in fact, is useful for anything that we do in Mark because so much of what's in Mark occurs elsewhere. So I wanted to take some time to do that. That is a little bit of an exception with this series in that we don't typically do as much. If you've never been, we don't typically do as much with features or how to find this particular button or task in accordance. This is a much more applied webinar. How do you use accordance? We're in accordance the whole time to translate the Greek text into English. And in this case, the focus is Mark. But again, today we will also look at the parallel tool. Just a little bit of housekeeping. In the GoToWebinar control panel, you will find this handout. It's in the handouts section. Make sure that the triangle to the left of the word handouts is clicked and pointed down so that you can see this PDF. You can click it and open it, you can print it, save it to your computer. If you're here now live, that means you're registered, which means you'll also get an email with a link to the recording of today. We are recording this session, and you'll have a link to the handout, an attachment there as well. If you're watching this on a recording afterwards, you can find this handout and all the other ones at tinyurl.com/Mark Translation Notes. And my email address is also here on the handout, abramkj@accordancebible.com. And then the last thing I'll say is if you are here live, you've got the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that you can use at any time to ask questions or make comments. I may not reply right away, but I will read everything, and I'll either respond individually or anonymously share your comment with the group and reply to it in that way. All right, here we go, Mark 14, 1 through 9. We're getting close to the end, at least in terms of chapters, but as I've noticed, we've got some long chapters here. So there's just 14, 15, and 16. But we'll see here that 14, and I know I'm scrolling quickly, but it goes on for a while, 72 verses. So we'll be in it for a while. And then chapter 15 is not terribly short, not terribly long. That's 47 verses. And then Mark 16, how many verses is that? Well, it depends on who you ask. And we'll have some fun looking at the different possible endings there, but that's a shorter chapter. So we begin today on a longer chapter of Mark 14. But just to catch us up, here's where we ended last time. We wrapped up with the end of Mark 13, verses 32 through 37. So we covered all those verses in the last time. And this is Jesus concluding the discourse with, as far as we can tell, 4 disciples. Now, it is of course possible that other people gathered around, whether other disciples or a crowd, but all that we get explicitly from Mark is that he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple. Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, and he began to say to them, we've got autois in the Greek text, and to them is these 4. And that speech that began in verse 5 continues uninterrupted through the whole chapter. We've spent some time on that. In fact, you can access those recordings under the help menu in webinars. There is this one move that Jesus makes where he says in verse 37, what I say to you, I say to everyone, stay alert. Or what to you I say, to all I say. I tried to preserve the word order in my translation, keep watch. So we don't know, is he looking around and saying this to other people? Is he projecting forward into the future, whoever else will hear this as it's passed down orally and will read it? Mark's not explicitly clear. At the least, we know that he began his response with that lengthy speech to 4 disciples. And whatever this looks like, whoever was physically there in the moment, he does broaden out and say, what I've been saying to you, and we've had keep watch here quite a few times through the chapter. He's saying, I say it to everyone, keep watch. So that's Mark 13. That's how it ends. And again, we'll come back to the parallel accounts in just a moment. But let's move ahead and see what happens next. This is a pretty strong speech. It's intense. It describes an intense future, whatever is going to happen, however it's going to happen, whenever it's going to happen. And we might wonder about a response, whether on the part of the disciples or others. And we don't necessarily get an explicit response. In other words, what Mark does not say, and Peter, John, James, and Andrew said in reply to Jesus, or but they asked him a question, or as we often see, but they didn't ask him any questions, even though they wanted to because they were afraid. We had that earlier. We just change scenes now, going to Jesus being anointed, and we get a little bit of setup here. In verses 1 and 2. This is as much as I think we'll probably cover today, because I do want to go back to the parallel. But here's Mark 14, 1 and 2, and let me open that in a Greek text. I'll make the font big enough to see. And I'm going to have this read aloud by the Greek New Testament audio tool, which is available in accordance. In fact, I can open this now from my recent modules, Greek New Testament audio. All right, let's start by hearing the first verse.
Inde ta Pascha kai ta azuma meta dua himeras, kai zeitun hoiarchieres kai hoigramates, fosautan indalo kratesantes apaktenosin.
All right, we'll do that one more time.
Inde ta Pascha kai ta azuma meta dua himeras, kai zeitun hoiarchieres kai hoigramates, fosautan indalo kratesantes apaktenosin.
All right, so let's unpack that. We begin with ein, which is an imperfect indicative third person singular. It's from a me, and if you didn't remember that, you've got the instant details just by hovering over and seeing in the instant details what the parsing is. So we've got a singular verb, and then we have what's called the post-positive day. Post-positive just meaning that it comes in second position. In fact, we could look up the Pocket New Testament Greek dictionary, and I bet the word post-positive is in there. Not occurring first in a clause, a word that cannot occur first. So gar, de, and un are post-positives. Kai, you will get first in a clause. De comes second. That's not necessarily true in English, so we want to put that word first. Now, or and, but there's different ways you can translate it. But we get this singular verb here first. So was now, so now was ta Pascha, the Passover, kai, and ta azuma, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. We'll come back to that word. Meta duo hemeras, after 2 days. So left to right, and left to right doesn't really work for a final translation, but left to right, you get something like, now was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread after 2 days. Now it was going to be that after 2 days. So in other words, this meta duo hemeras, it is translated as after 2 days. And you may experiment with a way that you can preserve that in English if you want to be really close to the Greek. More often, you're going to see a translation do something like what I've done here. Say these two feasts, the Passover and the Festival of the Unleavened Bread, were 2 days away. Or it was going to be the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread in 2 days. We might just see via live click how our different translations render this. By the way, I've just gone here, live click, gear icon, and I want verse lookup. Click OK. So now I can click on verse 1 anywhere in the reference. And look at this. Here's the authorized standard version. I mean, you get a very literal translation. Now, after 2 days was the feast of the Passover and the unleavened bread. You would just need to decide as a translator, and maybe you're working with the team or bouncing this off people, does that make sense in English? Personally, I think it's a little clunky. I like what Berean Bible does here. Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were 2 days away. You've also got this. It was 2 days before Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Exact same meaning in terms of the sense, even though you're using before instead of after. So I wouldn't belabor this decision, but it is the sort of decision that we're always having to make in translation. If something makes sense in Greek and you can make it make sense in English, following everything as closely as possible, great. But doing that in this case gives you a translation like the ASV here, and you may choose not to do it that way. There's another issue here that's just inescapable, and that is that you've got ta pascha. And if we go to the instant details, we can see, although our article confirms this too, but we've got a singular noun, and we've got ta azuma. We've got a plural noun, and that's used collectively, but all of that goes with a singular verb. This looks a little surprising, maybe, when you open up the diagrams, and I'm going to add parallel diagram. You can see here, you weren't mistaken if you wondered, what did I get the right subject, the right verb? Yeah, we've got a compound subject of Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, joined by the Chi, and they both go together with the ain. This diagram tool gives us the subject at left of this vertical line and the predicate at right. And the predicate is everything said about the subject, including this main verb, was. So in English, would you say, I suppose you could, the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread was 2 days away? You could do that if you think of that as one big collective feast. We'll come back to that in a minute because we have to get into the historical background for that. But Greek also, in English can do this sometimes too, but in Greek, you've got a collective noun, which is plural, essentially functioning as a singular. And this especially can take place with the neuter noun, where it can take a, you can have a plural neuter noun, and you've got it here, certainly with ta azuma, but then collectively with ta pascha, a plural neuter noun, and it's taking a singular verb. So this is a mismatch in number, plural subject and singular verb, but that's okay. That's not unexpected in Greek. We could find other instances of that. We've seen that elsewhere in Mark. So the only decision there in translation is, do I treat this as a collective singular in English, bring it over and preserve ain as was? Can I do that? Can I make that make sense? We might go back to live click again and see if we had any translations do that. In fact, yes, the ASV does that exactly. Now, after 2 days, so we have meta duo himeras, was the feast of the Passover and the unleavened bread. And if you think that won't, grate on your readers or your listeners to have was with a compound subject in English, then I would translate it that way. Otherwise, I don't think there's anything to say, don't just render it as were 2 days away. All right, so that's the setup. We've got that collective singular verb there. As far as this Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's interesting here to see if we triple click on Azuma, 1, 2, 3, and that takes me to my default Greek lexicon, which is BDAG. And you'll notice that I've got the scripture reference there. So in your settings, I want to review this from time to time. Under Amplify, if you've got this box checked, include reference, when amplifying from text to tool, that is to say, looking up a word from a text in a tool, if that's checked, then accordance will, with your triple click default, which takes me to BDAG, you can see that here, Greek, BDAG, triple click default. Accordance will not only give you the word, it will also look for the reference, and if it's there, it will show you and it will turn gray and it will be there in bold and red. Now, if you did that and a word wasn't in BDAG, it just wouldn't show up. There, for example, Duo just has the entry. But with Azuma, that is in this BDAG entry, so we can scroll down and see here it's under Feast or Festival of Unleavened Bread. Now, this word itself can mean unleavened bread or Festival of Unleavened Bread. Given the context, we're talking about a festival here, and you've got more cross references here that you could look at in BDAG. And then Max and Mary just have an interesting note. I included here that the is privative, so it's the negating word, just like we have the prefix un, or actually also have the prefix a in English that can negate something. And then we've got Zume for leaven, Feast of Unleavened Bread, celebrating during the week following Ta Pascha. Now to short circuit, or not to short circuit, but to summarize what could and probably should be a much more extended study, maybe on our own. France has a pretty lengthy section about this in his NIGTC. I left out the C in the handout there, but New International Greek Testament commentary. He says in practice, these two festivals, namely Passover, where they celebrate the Exodus, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he says they were treated together as a single period of celebration. Either Ta Pascha or Ta Azuma could be used for the whole 8-day period, so you could use those interchangeably. But he says the use of the two together here is more precise. I would advise or suggest in your add parallel, go to your info pane, and probably any of your commentaries is going to treat this these festivals and the timing and how they worked. Probably the Bible background commentary from Keener would be a good place to start. He talks about these adjacent festivals, which were often viewed together. And if you want some documentation, he quotes Josephus here. There's more on that, talking about exactly what would be happening in Jerusalem at that time. But you could search either of these words in your New Testament as well. But your commentary of choice, and France is no exception, is going to have more details on this and how these two words are used together and what exactly is going on, what's the timing of this. Now, the real question, I think, there are two questions. One is, how do I translate this in the end? And two is, what is Mark doing right now? And so on the first question, I think something like the Passover and the feast or the Festival of Unleavened Bread were 2 days away, or you could treat this as a collective and use was 2 days away. And then the other question, what is Mark doing here? I think there's something in the pegging this to the time and to the festival that we want to just bookmark. In fact, even now, we might look for Passover and see how Mark uses it. I'm just going to add a range here. In fact, let me just do Mark 14 through 16, and we'll see, is this word going to come up again? And it is. So there may be something, I'm saying maybe as if we haven't read Mark before, there may be something about this Pascha that's going to come up again. In fact, we get it in Mark 14:12. Now on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, there it is again, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed. So that actually gives us more about how Mark is construing these two in relation to each other. So we'll revisit this. But Jesus' disciples said to him, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? So even though Mark 14:1 and 2 are going to move into this anointing story, Mark, coming out of the discourse in Mark 13, Mark wants to date this. And I think we always do well to ask why. And we're going to get more on the Passover coming up, so we can continue to ask that question. We could do the same thing with this Festival of Unleavened Bread. We could search that and see, is that going to come up in Mark? And yeah, we saw that again in 14:12. So there is a world of study still to be done here, and you're maybe interested in getting into Passover imagery and this Passover lamb and Jesus as the Passover lamb, and does Mark pick up on that theme, and to what extent, and is that in other gospels? So that's something, again, I would just bookmark here, but I would stop and at least notice Mark is dating where we are. And that's all background. So I know we've just done one sentence. I intend to continue with this verse now, but let me stop there and just see if you've got questions or comments. This is all the setup. And the only reason I'm spending so much time on this is because as a reader, maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm a little bit surprised that this intense discourse in Mark 13 doesn't get a recorded reaction. So that just makes me want to pay special attention to what comes next. And this may not, there maybe is no way to bring this out in translation. I mean, you've just got day as a transition word. So all of this, it probably goes in a study note somewhere next to my translation, but it is a question of interest to me. This must be important. I think I could be overreading it, but it seems to me that given that discourse, given no reaction, still the next thing Mark gives us is going to be important. So the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread were 2 days away. Now you may disagree. I'm sure some scholars have said he's just dating it. Just like you said last Thursday, I went out with some friends, and all that you're doing is saying when it was. But I think we're going to see here as Mark goes on that there's more significance here with this. So let me pause there, consider that we've done 14a, and see if you've got comments or questions. Here, I'll put this in the chat anonymously. Somebody says, verse 14:1, after 2 days. English usage generally means after 2 full days. Jewish usage can mean after parts of 2 days. In fact, the very next day, Mark 14:12, is first day of unleavened bread, so it cannot be 2 full days. Thanks for that comment. And that is consistent with what France says. Which was not in what I gave you, but yeah, here we've got the Passover proper refers to the events of a roughly 12-hour period, which spanned 2 Jewish days. The Jewish day began at sunset. So he gets into that more and talks about the details of that. So you could consider, when you translate, even with the word days, if you want to bring out some kind of nuance like that in your translation. But yeah, thanks for that comment. And someone else says Mark 14:12 seems to use Roman use of day rather than Jewish use, evening and morning. Here's another comment. I'll just put this in. Thanks for filling this out. We've got some good crowdsourcing here. Someone says the Passover was 14 Nisan, which would be Friday evening, with lamb sacrifice being during the daytime, modern and Roman of Friday. Yeah, and I think in what I looked at, yeah, here we go. Here's France saying the same thing. Yeah, France does a pretty good job, I think, with treating this in a detailed yet concise way. It may be in your other commentaries as well. Great, thank you for those comments. Those are great. All right, so all of this setup, what's happening now? We get the Kai, and so this is moving on through the verse. Kai ezetun hoi archieres, kai hoi grammates, pos auton endalo, kratesantes apoktenosin. Left to right, we get something like, and were seeking, they were seeking. Who's they? Well, here's the subject, hoi, so we've got a plural nominative. That's the subject of this plural verb. Hoi archieres, so that's one set of actors, the chief priests. Kai, so compound subject again. Hoi grammates, it's glossed here as scribes. We'll come back to that in a minute. What were they seeking? Pos auton, how him in deceit, arresting they could kill, or they, yeah, this is not it's not easy to go left to right here, but it could help to see the diagrams and get a sense of how all of these words function together. And then we can translate. I'll share my translation in a moment, but here's the compound subject again. The chief priests and the scribes, or the Bible scholars, as I'll suggest in a moment, they were seeking, um, uh, they were looking for how they would kill him, having detained him in deceit. All right, well, we can get a little bit more fluid than that. Here's what I've suggested. And the chief priests and the law experts were sneakily seeking how to detain him so they could kill him. And I offer that as hopefully what you think is a good translation. Hopefully it's faithful and accurate. It's certainly not the only way to translate these verses, but let's start with the who here. We've got hoi grammates. If we triple click that to look this up in BDAG, we can see more on this. I so appreciate this definition. This has helped me with this word time and time again. They talk about this as being an expert in matters relating to divine revelation. You're going to see a lot of translations that will render this as, let's see, chief priests and the scribes. All right, we've got legal experts. I think that's a good translation. You may get lawyers somewhere. Scribes is a tough word. We've talked about this before because, again, as I've said in current parlance, if I say scribe, we're more likely to think someone who just writes stuff down. And not that that's not an important task, but that's not the totality of what these folks did. We get a lot of scribes here. Here's experts in the law. That's helpful. But yeah, so BDAG says an expert in matters relating to divine revelation, experts in the law. And you may see this in some translations, experts in the law. What's worth noting, and this has come up before in Mark, so pardon the repetition, but when we think about translating, I think we want to think about how does the word law translate from first century Palestine to 21st century, wherever you are. And chances are it doesn't translate the same way. So I want to think about this a little bit more. It is law in the sense, if they're experts in the law, or I suppose you could say lawyers, but that brings up other connotations. You may not see that as a good translation. Law is law, capital L, in the sense of God's divine revelation. So here's BDAG, an expert in matters relating to divine revelation. And if you were to just step back and ask yourself the question, how would I describe somebody today? What language would I use? What word or words would I use to describe an expert in matters relating to divine revelation? And I think something like Bible scholar or expert in scripture, something like that is good. Bible, even that word, that could be in an acronym. So you want to think about, okay, how do I bridge the gap between then and now and be both faithful and accurate to what it was then in a way that makes sense now in translation? That's always the task of translation, but you've got some options here. BDAG has more on this, and you could also go back now, which we've done from time to time, and even see how Mark uses this. You could do your own kind of lexical entry by answering the question, what are these people doing in Mark? That might help you get more at how you would translate it, how you would name it. But the kind of the difference here is that how we might think about law, like civil law or criminal law, that's not the same. If we say experts in the law, that's not the same kind of law. So I think Bible scholars, experts in scripture is good. I just kept it as law experts here. So that's one way to do it. If you're going to translate it this way, I think just be ready in your own notes for yourself, or if you're doing this in a group setting, I would just suggest bringing out that difference in law, or saying, what did law mean then? Because it's not necessarily how you might describe a law expert today. So that's grammates. That's one of the two collectives that are here looking to detain him. We've got a zaytun, imperfect, active, indicative, third person plural. They were seeking. I'm reading that as an ongoing effort, that it's on this particular day and before that too. But you don't really have to determine. I mean, I suppose you could go back and look through Mark, like, do we have attempts on Jesus's life already? But I think just we're seeking brings out the imperfect just fine, even without making a decision about that. Indalo is an interesting phrase. We've got it here. If you triple click Dalo, you can see BDAG gives it as taking advantage through craft and underhanded methods, deceit, cunning, treachery. So that word deceit, in fact, I wonder if we could find some other, yeah, here's the word I'm looking for, is daliao, to deceive. So I did that kind of quickly, but I right click, search for roots, and you can see that word here for deceive. So I would want to bring out deceit in some way, but you actually have a lot of, it's kind of amazing how many words in English we have for deceit or stealth or treachery here, as BDAG gives us. So I've just listed some. This N here and Dalo, in deceit, I think an ly adverb in English is perfectly appropriate here. Sneakily is what I've given. Maybe that underplays the deceit angle. It maybe, I don't know, you might want a stronger word there, but it's both that they're trying to do it in a way that is not honest, and they're trying to do it in a way that they don't get caught. So I think if that can come out, treacherously is a good word. Furtively, secretly, stealthily. You might even compare translations and see what you have there. But that is the spirit in which, or the method in which they are seeking to detain him, to kill him. Endalo. Worth a word study. We might even see how Mark has used this. Who has had this word used of them? Interestingly, we get this word spoken of negatively by Jesus, not surprisingly. It's the only other time in Mark. So you could look at that and see if that helps you. But yeah, definitely a range of options here for translation. And then we move on to the verb. And let me get the diagrams open again. Parallel diagram. All right, so we've got, they were seeking how they, so we've got apoktenosine. So we get another indicative, or I'm sorry, a subjunctive verb here, which is modified, grammatically speaking, by the participle. So the participle is grammatically subordinate to a main verb or an indicative verb or a subjunctive verb. You see how it comes off the line there. I'm going to fix this in the handout. This should not say indicative. This should say subjunctive. I'm sorry about that. But it is a main verb. So the question is, what's the relationship of the participle to the main verb? You could just translate it as two indicatives, as a number of translations do. You could also understand it as a participle of purpose. They were seeking to detain him so that they could kill him. Just more on this word detain or arrest or seize or control. Again, you've got a range of options for translation. BDAG does give us a reference here under to take control of something or someone, seize, control. And they give here to take into custody, to arrest, to apprehend. I think detain is a good word. I think arrest is fine, but I think there's also something here that you know, this is not just, I mean, it's not, Mark is pitching this or showing this because of the deceit, not as a lawful arrest. So personally, I wouldn't translate it as arrest, because there could be a lawful way, there could be an honest way in which a person is arrested, and this is not that. So I like the word, even detain, maybe you need something stronger than that, but it's worth thinking about. The question is, can you carry over the nuance from this deceit word into the detaining? And so maybe a word, I don't know, seize is a good word. You'll see that in some translations. So that's worth thinking through. Interestingly, and we'll wrap up this verse in just a moment, but interestingly, we might think ahead to how the crucifixion played out. And I kind of puzzled over this briefly. I thought it would be worth mentioning. This word kill is active. And so what the translation is not is they were seeking how they might detain him in order to have him killed, even if that's how like the Roman crucifixion worked. So I just think that's interesting. So even if that's correct, it's an active verb. So I just want to make sure I bring it out as an active verb. So that's why you've got how to detain him so they could kill him, whether they're the ones actually doing the killing or not. I just want to follow Mark here, but I do understand, and Mark will explain this exactly how that works. That may surprise me. So that was something I had to double check. Like, is that active and not passive? Yeah, it is active. So bring that out if possible. So overall, with this verse, I would say whatever translation choices you make at the word level, I think it's important just to follow Mark with, what is he trying to do here? Well, I hear language of deceit. I hear language of coercion with kratesantes, with this seizing or detaining or arresting under false pretenses, however you want to bring that out. It is violating Jesus's consent. Well, although I say that, I mean, it's interesting, Jesus will go willingly, but the word itself, it carries those connotations of doing something against somebody's wishes or not even stopping to see what their wishes are. So it's power over. And then you've got murder, just straight up murder. So this is strong language here that Mark is giving us, and it sets the tone, and he pairs it with the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it is, in fact, going to set the tone for Mark 14 and for the rest of the book. Now, Mark is not explicit, backing out again to Mark 13, if or how this connects to Jesus's discourse in Mark 13. Is this a question we need to answer for translation? I don't think so. I think you just translate Mark how Mark wrote Mark. So if Mark doesn't answer the question in Greek, I would not try to answer it in English, at least not in the translation. I do want to answer it because I'm curious. And if I were writing a commentary, I would want to do that, or at least explore it. So yeah, I don't think he explicitly says how it connects. If you see something I'm missing, I'd love to hear it in the comments, but it's worth exploring anyway in your commentaries, in your own close read. And here I think is a good point at which to look at the parallels in Mark 13. I'll take maybe just 5 or 10 minutes to do this so that we can still get to verse 2. I don't have as much on verse 2. But let's go into the parallels tool. As I do that, let me know if you've got questions about the rest of the verse or comments here. This part about the chief priests and the law experts and how we translate some of these words. Again, I offer this provisionally. I mean, I stand by this translation, but I think there's a number of ways you could translate that. So let me know if you've got comments or questions, and then we'll move into the parallels tool just before we leave Mark 13 altogether to see is there some kind of connection here? If not from Mark, then is there a connection in the other gospels? Yeah, somebody says, what about experts in biblical law? Yeah, I think that's great. That would be great because that retains law, which is how they would have thought of it, and it clarifies biblical for a modern audience. So I think that's an excellent translation. It brings more words into it, but what are you going to do? I mean, that's you get the clarity and you get the fidelity there. So I think that's great. That's a great translation. And then just the friendly reminder to myself and maybe to you that this is a group of people that comes up again and again. So if you were doing this translation as a whole and 14 chapters in, you realize that is the best translation, I would just remember that, oh yeah, that was in these other chapters. So just go back and I would then revise to experts in biblical law, all the other places that it occurs, as long as that makes sense, which I typically with a group of people like this, you'd want to translate it one way. All right, let's do our excursus on the parallels here. And I don't know that this is going to answer the question of this, what does Mark doing with 14 as it relates to 13? But we did have that question come up a number of times as we looked through Mark 13. This is the Gospel Parallels edited by Aland. And we've looked at this a few times before. Please ask questions at any level on this, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box. But what you've got here, and I'll just give a very short summary, you've got a few things going on here. One is your search entry area, which you can expect from a tool like this or a module like this. And you can search it by title or title number. So if you're corresponding, somebody in their print edition says, oh, it's 243, you can do it that way, but probably you'll be looking by title or references. So that's the search entry area. You've got the Gospels themselves here, and then here at right, we've got the titles. So in the print edition, these are the headings. And you can move all of this stuff around. I mean, this is a huge search entry area. I'm never probably going to have a string this long, but I do drag it around so that I can see more of the titles, and then this drags left. So I'm going to very quickly scroll through this all the way to the end. 367 is how many titles we get. And some of them will have all 4 Gospels, especially toward the end here. Some of them, like the thieves at the cross, that ought to be just 1 Gospel, right? Nope, that would be, well, it's 3 Gospels, but you only get the extended narrative in Luke. So you can see with any of these titles or headings, like the death of Judas, just Matthew, you can advance that way. But we want to use it by reference. So we want to do Mark 13. Now, this is an interesting conundrum with this particular tool, because look how Mark 13 is split out in the Gospel Parallels. This tool, and I think the other parallels are like this, it is not organized by Mark, which, they've got their reasons for that. They're not doing Mark translation notes, and so there's no way that I know of to organize it by Mark. So what you get is different headings with different parts of Mark lined up. So this will take some time. I mean, you only get Mark 13:1 by number 287. So notice how you search Mark 13. Like, I want the whole chapter, let's say. I mean, I could narrow it down and just do 1 verse at a time, but I want the whole chapter. This titles area only now has hits, which is good. If I've got nothing here, it's got the whole thing. It's like a full-on table of contents. But now, Mark 13, it's just the relevant one. So that's good. It's just that in this particular instance, it's going to take some time. And that's going to raise more questions that we won't address now. But notice here, like, you've got heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Well, we get the parallel to that, as Aland construes it, in Luke 16:17 and in Matthew 5. But if we go to something like the coming of the Son of Man in Mark 13:24, that jumps us to Matthew 24 and Luke 21. So this is really usable, given the way that Mark 13 shows up potentially in other chapters. There's going to be some jumping around you'll have to do. But what I would suggest is, go through these ones that look like they're disjointed, but then really pay attention. You're going to get things grouped in sequence here. So prediction of the destruction of the temple, signs before the end. So notice now we've got Mark 13:1, Mark 13:3, persecutions foretold, Mark 13:9. So we are advancing more according to the chapter in verse order. So that's how I would navigate the tool starting here. But you might even be better served for this particular passage with the synopsis tool to think about, is there something in Mark that I want to look at in particular? A great example would be this verse we looked at last time, about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, except for the Father. So for that, go to Mark 13:32, and you're going to get right to one heading in Aland, and you can see here how the other Gospels, both Matthew and Luke, tell this part of the story. Now in Luke, it looks like we don't have the no one knows statement at all. Why did it give us this? Well, we looked for Mark 13:32. So what it gave us was the passage in Mark that's in the Alond heading that includes Mark 13:32, if that makes sense. So we have Mark 13:32, and so that passage with the fig tree is here in Luke, but Luke does not have that line. Matthew does. About that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. So this could be fun. It could be overwhelming. It could be both to go through this tool and try different parts of Mark 13. I think what I would more be interested in doing is seeing, for example, when I go to Mark 13:1, okay, look, here's Matthew 24. And as I'm advancing through, I'm seeing more and more of Matthew 24. So what I'm probably going to do, if my goal is to answer the question, how do the other gospels tell of this discourse? How do they record it? I am more likely to want to just go to that passage itself. And just as we did with Mark, can I take this passage on its terms and see what meanings come up? Are there different nuances that come out? And we've got a pretty similar start here with Matthew. His disciples came to him privately, so these are not named here, so that's a difference. But you could do some comparing and contrasting. The abomination of desolation, you could look up that particular verse, the arrival of the Son of Man. So you've got, Matthew's a pretty close parallel. I would also look up Luke and see what Luke 21 has to say. But that's the parallel tool. This is, I'm just amazed at how, somebody asked me, the desert island book question, and I realized, as hard as that question has been to answer my whole life, I had this epiphany one Easter season, because I'd been in the print version of this. This would be one of my easily top 5 desert island books, specifically the Greek English version, because it's not the whole Bible. I'd need a Bible too, but I'd get the whole Gospels. I'd see how they fit together. I'd have the Greek, I'd have the English. It's all right here in accordance. That's a 5 to 10 minute overview of how to use it. And just note that Mark 13 is a little bit tricky, because as Alon reads it, you've got some of what Mark is saying in 13, some of what Jesus is saying. He locates that elsewhere. So, and you even have, complicating it further, is that you've got this take heed according to Mark, and according to Luke, he sees this coming up a couple times. So this is a great tool. You've got it in your library. If you just look for, you can look under parallels, but I look up Alon to get there quickly. Let me know if you've got comments or questions about that. You cannot search this by word. In other words, you could not go in here and search like abomination of desolation. You would have to just find the verse that's in, and go that way. So there are some limitations to it, but it's an excellent tool, and what it does, I think, is just pretty amazing. And keeping in mind too, this is, Alon is an editor. He's about as expert as you get with this stuff, but there may be some passages put next to each other that maybe you don't think that's quite a parallel, but I found this to be a really reliable tool. All right, so yeah, then the related question with Mark 13 and Mark 14, well, how about Matthew? Can we see what happens after this? So he says, be ready at the end, and we get more details in Matthew. We get the faithful and wise servant, and then a parable. And so really this is kind of still going with Matthew after the discourse. And then here we go. So this looks like our parallel in Mark 14, when Jesus had finished saying all these things. So we get a longer discourse in Matthew. He told his disciples, you know that after 2 days, there's that same phrase, meta duo hemeras. So this is our parallel passage to today. The Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. And then here's this planning to arrest and kill him, not during the feast. So this, I think, connects a little bit more tightly with the Jesus had finished saying all these things, and you even have Jesus here predicting his death. So that's something that's interesting. So again, translate Mark on Mark's terms. We, you know, for translation, I don't think we want to import anything else, but so for understanding and interpretation, it certainly helps. Any questions about that parallel tool, or comments about it, or whether, you know, looking at the parallel passage, we didn't look at Luke, but whether that sheds any light on our passage today. So here's be ready. Yeah, so in Luke, after all this, the last be watch, he just kind of backs out and says Jesus was teaching all the time, every day, but at night he stayed at Mount of Olives. People came to him to listen to him. So then we move into Judas. Yeah, all right, comments or questions? Yeah, here's a question. Somebody says, I have been taught Matthew is more topical in its arrangement, Luke is chronological, and Mark tends to be more like Luke than Matthew. Yeah, I read, I think it was Mark Goodacre who said, and I hadn't heard this before, some of you may have who are more versed in synoptic comparisons than I am, but it was something about Mark being a middle, I forget the exact phrase, but it was like a middle something between Matthew and Luke. And so, you know, it's kind of almost like it's a blend of the two. Yeah, I mean, I think this would be a great thing to look in your any of your gospel commentaries on Mark actually will have comment on this at the very beginning. How does this fit with the other gospels? So I would go there. I don't know that I have an informed comment on what you're noticing there. And I think this certainly is up for discussion even among scholars as to which is more like the other and which came first, and, you know, was it Mark first or something else? So yeah, I think this would be a good time to go back to your introductions and look at them. My understanding of that Eland tool, it's not organized by Mark. I think it is by and large chronological. And so if you were to read, you know, you can't read straight through any one gospel in it, but you can come close. But yeah, I'll stop there. That's a great comment and great question, and I would welcome any others that folks have. Here's verse 2, and we'll wrap up with this. Let me get back to my Greek text here. So we've got this plot here. Sorry about that. Let me mark 14:2. All right, very short verse. So after all of that, so they're looking for a way to detain him, to seize him, to deceitfully, unlawfully arrest him, however you translate that, so they could kill him. So that's setting the stage, but not yet. We get gar, another post-positive word, elegan gar, for they said, me ente heorte, not in the festival. Mepate estai tharubas tu lao. Let's not do it in the festival. That's a fragment with everything else implied. You'll see in the diagram, they will put in parentheses what's implied there. For they said, yeah, let's not detain him, not during the festival, lest there be an uprising or a riot from the people. That's in the genitive case. So the tharubas, what modifies it is of the people. What kind of uprising? Whose uprising? Well, it would be an uprising of the people. Mark and the religious leaders here don't clarify exactly who the people are, but we've got masses there now. You could read more about that in your commentaries. So that I don't think they're necessarily worried about which people, just that it's going to be a riot if they arrest him, or so they think. That elegon there is imperfect. They had said, or they were saying, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. I think you could read this two different ways. I don't think this first one is very likely, but you could, I mean, I suppose you could read it as they're going to try and detain and kill Jesus right now, the 2 days before the feast. So in other words, we've got here, we're 2 days away. They were trying to kill him. And they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar, and we only have the 2 days, however you measure it, however you count it. So let's do it right now. Well, that's possible technically. I mean, I don't see anything in the language that prevents that possibility. But as this unfolds, we're going to have more things happen. So I think more likely is that they are close enough to the feast that it is already essentially during the feast with that word "en." I think this is Mark's way, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, but I think this is Mark's way of just backgrounding the fact that even though this plan is underway, they are not going to seek to detain Jesus and kill him in verse 3 onward. And that for sure is going to be true because, as we'll see next week, we get Jesus's anointing. But we do get into this plan to betray Jesus. So this background in verses 1 and 2 are, I think, meant by Mark to be kind of lurking here, so that even when you get to Passover and unleavened bread again in verse 12, when those get mentioned, we know that was coming, and we know that they're trying, even still in verse 12, to arrest Jesus and kill him, but that they're not going to. But Mark gives us a real tension there. And we get to follow him to see how it unfolds. But again, this first option I don't see as viable. But as I read it closely at first, I thought, well, I mean, you could interpret it that way. But I think more likely, Mark is saying that the feast isn't here just yet, but they're already past the point of being able to do something successfully. People already streaming in, and so they're just going to hold off on that. Very briefly on Tharubas, this is the last thing I'll say, and then we'll use the rest of the time for questions. We've got here, BDAG gives us a reference, 14:2, of the noise and confusion of excited crowds, a state of condition of varying degrees of commotion, turmoil, excitement, uproar, uprising, the people turning into a mob. Here we get, here's the NET note. We'll conclude with this. The suggestion here is that Jesus was too popular to openly arrest him. The verb "were trying" is imperfect. It suggests in this context that they were always considering the opportunity. So if that read of the imperfect is right, again, that gives us some tension in the background, even with this anointing going on, that Mark's sort of setting these folks into motion. They're trying. Even as I tell you this story, they're trying. And we wonder, as readers or as the first listeners did, what's going to happen. Are they going to get him, and when? So Mark, I think, just is a masterful storyteller. As much as he has a reputation for being terse or concise, and he is concise, I think I've seen scholars start to say just more and more that Mark really knew what he was doing. This is not crude, rough, kind of slapdash Greek. This is a masterful storyteller. So I think there's a lot going on here, even just with these two verses. Let me stop there and see if you've got comments or questions, especially if you have not had a chance to ask a question or make a comment. I'll prioritize those folks, and then we'll continue with the rest of the comments. Here's a comment. I'll share this. Somebody says, key point in Mark 14 is made by the gar clause of verse 2. The Jews are committed to not kill Jesus during Passover, yet God's sovereign plan is the Lamb of God dying on Passover, per Isaiah 53, 1 through 9. Thanks for the comment. Let me see. Okay, here's another comment. I'll just share this in the chat. Someone says, as the feast started Friday night for the Jews, it seems they did seek to arrest and kill him before the feast started. Yeah, so that's another thing that will be interesting to watch unfold. Are they going to stick with their plan? I mean, just because they're saying now that they're going to hold off on it, I mean, tension has a way of spilling over. So again, I think Mark is just really setting us up for a powerful story. And yeah, I think that Passover piece is going to be important. So we'll come back to that at the end. Yeah, here's a question. Somebody said let me try this again. Is the Nestle Elan parallel part of my NA28? I couldn't find it in the store. It should be in your library. I think every collection in accordance has it. I would search ALAND in your library, and if you're not showing by doing that, I would go to Easy Install and make sure that it's installed there. So Easy Install will show all the modules that you own, and it will gray out the ones that are already installed. But I would go there and check that, and you should find it there. If you don't, please feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to walk you through that. But like, it's not showing here because I've already installed it in my library. But if you don't have it in your library, it should be showing here. But again, feel free, if that doesn't work for you, you can email me, and I'd be happy to make sure that you get set up with that. All right, thanks so much, everyone. I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll stay on for just another moment with a little bit of housekeeping. But just a reminder that the handout is here at tinyurl.com/marktranslationnotes, and my email address is showing here on the screen as well.